Hello everyone, I'm Zsolt, here to guide you through how to style big projects with BAM theming and good practices included, this time around in English, because this is a more technical topic. It's going to be mainly in English anyway if I do it in Hungarian, so might as well. So first of all, for small projects, you have not a care in the world, of course. You don't have to care about naming, extensibility, full site changes, dependencies. We just do whatever we want. Chances are nobody else will be working on the same project as us. So the main goal here for small projects is to be fast and to have something that we can show for the customer or show for the world, whatever the end goal is. Get it done quickly, basically. Speed is the only and main concern. And the fastest way to achieve that goal is a styling lib, of course. Why do the work when somebody else has already done it? I myself use Angular material or Bootstrap for smaller projects depending on the needs, or other libraries I find on the go. This is the fastest way to do it. But while doing it, we must be careful as well. And for bigger projects, you can imagine if this kind of repetition, this is by the way from Bootstrap's documentation, this kind of repetition is needed, and this verbosity is needed to simply describe the layout, because this is all that does. It defines columns. It's gonna be a huge problem. Imagine a few hundred lines of code with lines like this. It's just not maintainable, and you need to add, styles, margins, colors, fonts, whatever. And then again, for bigger projects, you might have customers that are businesses themselves, and businesses do like their own brands, their own images, their own brand image, and for that they might want you to theme the product that you're selling to them the way they look. As an example of customizability on a component level, so tabs are one of the most basic components in every medium to big project. Very simple functionality. Click on a tab and an attached view is shown. Click on a related or on the next tab and a related but different view is shown, generally speaking. But just check this one picture here. Live has a little icon and has different color than bedslip and single, and bedslip doesn't have an underline, but single has the same underline as or button border as live. So there are similarities, there are differences, but again, functionally these are the same components. So somehow you need to make it customizable, because you don't want to repeat the same functionality over and over again, or introduce introduce mode flags for. So it's never a good practice to have a component know where they appear. They must be customizable through well-defined APIs, so it's extensible. What if you need the fourth one? It's getting out of hand very quickly if you try the other way. So what we need is basically modularity, it's a hard word, configurability, at least build time. It can be runtime configurability as well, but that's, as you can imagine, might be a bit trickier. And predefined dependencies, of course. And why do we need this modularity? Because it's easier to construct modular systems and easier to reuse parts. Configurability for easy customization, as we have already seen in the tab example, and predefined dependencies for less regressions. The clearer the better. Well, let's see some bad examples, because bad examples are always more fun than good examples, which is a bit dry, but still useful. Might be as useful as the good example, some bad examples. We can learn from them as well. So inline styles are important. I wanted to list them because it's still relevant to talk about them. I see them a lot. It's not a good practice, especially inline styles. Just forget about that. Important has a place, has its own place, but it's like using set timeout for Angular change detection trigger. So whenever you write down set timeout in an Angular component or important inside a CSS file, it's 99% not the right solution. Just keep looking. And if you don't find anything or find a definite answer that this is the only way or this is the right way to use them, then use it. But fairly evident, don't use important, don't use inline styles. That's what I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. Enough of them. But for global classes and rigid directive-based systems, let's look into those. So global classes, very similar or exactly the same as we saw with Bootstrap and the columns, but we can use it for a common widget look. I mean, it's tempting, right? We want a common look for all our widgets. So let's define a common class on the top level style sheet and just apply widget class on anything that needs to look like that. But then again, we might want padding or display flex or box shadow, and there are hundreds of cases reappearing patterns that we want to cover with these classes. And it's, as you can tell, it can again get out of hand very quickly. So imagine this line added to the Bootstrap example. What would that be? That's not the only problem with that. It's a similar topic, but talking about Angular and Angular components directives, there are design systems like Fundamental SAP, Fundamental NGX, or Fundamental Style that uses the Angular directives to apply as an instance layout or some sort of styles. Using directives for styling is a good practice, or can be a good practice, if it is truly something dynamic that you want to collect under the same umbrella. This is from the fundamental documentation. It's you can find it on GitHub. They applied the same columns as Bootstrap. The only difference being they use directives. But to collect all the problems with the aforementioned two classes of bad practices, many classes we saw in the last examples. We have 5, 6, 7, 10, even 15 classes on a single tag. How can we tell if somebody not accidentally, by not double checking, applied the same margin, get me, with a different class, didn't notice because it looks the very same, but it has a stronger specificity than the AC, being acceptance criteria, the one that actually implemented the acceptance criteria, and later on the class changes that margin. Now you have a bug, and then you can reverse engineer what actually happened and how is it a bug, what to do, what was the original purpose. It takes a lot of time. Hidden connections inside the component. This is a prime example of that. We want 4 of our divs to look the same, but we need to repeat the same thing over and over again instead of collecting them and telling all these 3 must look the same. These are coincidentally looking the same right now because they are using repetition. Obscurity. Some classes we might not even know what, I mean widget. It can cover many things, and for a component that we don't want to use just like 6 out of the 5 rules, declarations, it defines, Of course, we're gonna override that one. But again, when you're starting to debug things that are hacked together with parts from here, parts from there, a little bit of extension here, it's going to get messy real fast. Rigidness, I mean, you can extend classes fairly easily, but still it doesn't have that much of a leeway as functions, for example. Bundle size, you have global classes, right? Globally defined rule sets. It's always loading with the site. Doesn't matter if you use lazy loading or whatever. It's always loading and doesn't care if you are using all parts of it right away on the dashboard. I mean, it's not a big deal, but it does increase the bundle size. Maintainability can be a real issue, as global classes might be only generic for a set of components, for example, popovers. And you can imagine there are two cases. We have a huge CSS file, the top level CSS, which contains all kinds of global CSS classes like popover, widget, the whatever, everything. Or we have many smaller ones, but then again, what's easier, maintaining one huge couple thousand lines of CSS or dozens of files? Neither, right? Hidden dependency doesn't only mean what I already mentioned with the repetition, because they do depend on each other. We wanted them to look the same, but it is coincidental. But it also means we can introduce backward dependencies between our normal flow of dependencies. So, for example, we want our top level module that initiates the whole application to only depend on others and never others depend on it, right? So it's a one-way thing. But if you have the global classes defined inside there and others that the top level module loads are using those classes, then that's dependency. And it's the wrong way and it's hidden. I don't mean this as the only solution. This is one solution, but semantical CSS classes like BEM, but there are many similar classes, block element modifier, by the way, reusable mixins and constants, special mixins for theming. What do they do? So semantical classes, very simple. We just name all the elements inside the templates of what they are and what their state is if needed. This already eliminates 3 of our problems. An example of semantical class names. This is actually an example how a style library can be implemented right, because this is Bootstrap, and Bootstrap provides us a way to actually use the same column layout functionality from SASS. As you can tell, targeting three semantically named elements inside the template and applying the same layout, very simple dependency. We can see right away that we wanted them to look the same, and it's not a coincidence. SASS snippets, constants for common values. We can use them everywhere. It's practical. Mixins for configurable themes, and also mixins for configurable rule sets. SASS is a very good tool if used right, of course. It lets us use lazy loading. It's more maintainable, and there are no hidden dependencies because we can lint the SASS imports. So here is an example for theming. Very simple. We have a mixin that receives a config, right? The config is merged with the default values. at the same time, we define the API for this theming. We define all the keys this theming mixin accepts. And then inside we use with map-get from this config and the default values. So if lib card border is not defined either in the config, that's the parameter, neither has, as you can tell, it's null, so it doesn't have a default value, then libcard won't get a border, and that's the beauty of it. Also, if config doesn't have libcard border, but we have a default value, then we will use the default value. And the last one, if config has a value, then whatever the default value was, either null or something else, we will have the border as defined in the config. Very practical. And actually that is how basically Angular material does this. Does the same theming. And this is how we use theming. So for example, top level, when we load the application, we define a configuration or many smaller configurations for each scene, component or view we want, merge them together and pass it through the layers right down to the specific components. But we can also extend this functionality, right? So from the top level, when we start or load the application, we define what we want generally to, for example, this libcard look like. In different other components or views, we might want, like for the tabs, we might want them to look differently. Just include the defined component, card component dynamic theme mixin, and pass a new value that will override the initial one and also the default one. Here's an example of configurable styling. So for repeating patterns, like ellipsis is, I think, the prime example of this. It's needed by every project always, and you can just Google it and there is the snippet. It's 3 lines of CSS, always the same 3 lines if you don't want multi-line ellipsis, but always the same 3 line repeating all over the place. Why don't we just have a mixin that defines it, we include it, and done. There it is, include theme.ellipsis, done. Not the same repeating 3 lines. No chance of error, understandable for any juniors. It's just easy. And of course, this is extendable as well. So if we define functions, we can modify parts of not just actual theming like fonts, font sizes, colors and such, but actually we can control all the aspects of the style sheet. But be careful with that. Don't use too complicated functions. Keep it simple. And thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. Please subscribe to the channel if you found it interesting. Leave a comment if you want similar episodes or if I should go back to the original direction. And cheers.